Welcome to the Worldwide Doula Podcast. I'm Berry, I'm a registered nurse and birth doula, and each week I'm joined by a new guest speaker to talk about all things pregnancy, birth, babies, and parenthood. So sit back and relax as we get into some juicy topics. Hi everyone, welcome to today's podcast. I'm so excited about this one. It's been in the works for some time now. Today I'm going to be interviewing my own mama about her home and hospital birth with my twin sisters who are older than me. I've heard this story a few times, but it's quite a different story to a lot of the ones that you hear out there, and that's why I wanted to share it with you today. So welcome to the podcast, Mama. Thanks for coming on today.
Mama. That's my pleasure, darling.
So we're here to talk about your first birth with Tia and Rosie, with the twins. And just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? Where do you live in the world?
So I started out life studying in Oxford, and I studied anthropology and history and specialised in social medical anthropology, and I looked very deeply at women and the traditional systems for childbirth and pregnancy in the village in Java, Western Java, and the new systems. Indonesia brought out a family planning program to control population, and so I analysed the traditional systems and beliefs and the more modern versions. So I've always been fairly academic on the topic of childbirth and raising family. And then I went on to become a construction professional. I don't know how it works that you do anthropology and then construction, but I'm a property developer and a builder, and I live internationally. So now I'm at the joyful later part of life where I can be a little more relaxed and a little free. People always think getting older is not good, but I tell you, it's probably the best. And now I get to spend time staying with my various children around the world, and I'm waiting for them to each get married and bring little blessed babies into my life so I can be a granny wanny. So I'm very happy to share my story with you. And I'd like to say it's a fairly controversial story. I in no way wish to upset anybody with it, and I'm certainly not promoting or trying to influence anybody's thinking. It's purely Barry's asked me to share my personal experience, and I'm happy and willing to do so. I believe that women need to ask each other more questions about these things so they can understand each other's experiences, because it's a little bit of a mystery what happens when you have a baby.
Yes, and that's the whole reason of this podcast. So yeah, definitely. We're both actually in Indonesia right now. My mum's in Bali and I'm in Sumbawa, which is quite rural. So we actually ended up in the same place in the world for a short time, which is lovely. Anyway, let's get straight into it. Tell me about what happened before you fell pregnant. Were you married? Were you trying for a long time? Did it happen straight away? And what year was it when you fell pregnant? And did you have any issues or difficulties falling pregnant at all? Any conditions or anything?
So I think I've been very blessed. I've never had any problems with my periods. I never had any problems with fertility. Literally, as soon as I decided that I wanted to have a baby, I didn't get pregnant immediately. It probably took a month or two. But I remember having a shower and suddenly having to step out of the shower to vomit halfway through my morning shower into the loo. And just thinking, wow, what was that about? And I was actually getting ready to get on a plane. I was living in Brisbane and I was going to England, probably to see my family. So I was getting ready to get on an airplane. And I just had this little early morning experience. And so I said goodbye to your dad. And I can't remember whether we did a pregnancy test before or afterwards. I think maybe we were traveling together. I don't know. I can't remember the exact things, but I just remember suddenly I was sick. And then I found out I was pregnant. And I thought it was a normal pregnancy, but I was horribly sick. Could not eat anything except lemonade, icy poles for months. And so, yes, I didn't have any problems getting pregnant either time I got pregnant. And I've had very straightforward pregnancies. I've carried my babies full term. I've had very strong, healthy, beautiful babies. So I've been very blessed with all that. But I think partly because I was 26 years old when I first got pregnant. And I think I was blessed. I did everything pretty early. So that was 1995 when I fell pregnant with the twins. Of course,
Oh,
I
yes,
didn't know
that
it was
makes
twins.
sense. Yeah. Yeah. It's good to have a smooth pregnancy. Not many do, but yeah, morning sickness, it's not very nice. So you're well, did you have morning sickness with me then?
I suffered very badly with the twins. I did have morning sickness with you, but it wasn't as bad. But with the twins, do you know pica? I think you call it pica when you have funny cravings.
Yeah.
So the cravings I had when the twins were in my tummy, and I can't remember if it was the same with you, were for board chalk. I
Oh,
wanted to eat
yeah.
board chalk. So I used to go and
Very
find the
strange
board chalk at
craving.
the supermarket, thinking it was the most delicious thing in the world. And then I'd make myself chew on magnesium tablets instead
Yeah.
because I thought maybe the board chalk might have things in it that aren't supposed to be eaten. So
Yeah.
I'd actually like nibble away at magnesium tablets. But nothing helped the morning sickness. I used to carry a few dry biscuits around. It was a little bit like if my tummy was a bit too empty, then I'd feel more sick. So just dry crackers helped me enormously. They'd quell the sickness for a little while until I needed the next dry cracker.
Mm. I always tell the pregnant ladies that I meet who have morning sickness to try some ginger tea because ginger's perfect natural remedy for morning sickness. I mean, it doesn't work for everyone, and especially if you don't like ginger, but I always find that it works with nausea. And when you found out that you were having twins, what was your reaction? And how far along were you when you found out that you were having twins?
It's a long time ago for me to remember all the details precisely. Basically, I just had a normal, healthy pregnancy, and I'm not somebody who's against the medical system in any way. I always keep myself healthy and strong. I've always had my yoga practice. I decided to think about engaging healthcare professionals. I made sure I had private health covered previous to getting pregnant. So I think it was at 13 weeks or 16 weeks when they do the standard first ultrasound. We were living in Dapto up on the escarpment doing a large development, and so my closest hospital was Wollongong. I went there for an ultrasound, and the lady said everything looks really healthy, and then she said there are 3 hands in the ultrasound. And I freaked out and said, my baby has 3 hands. And she said, no, you have 2 babies in here. There's the 4th hand, there's the other little leg, and she showed me 2 babies. And I completely hyperventilated and freaked out because I just kept saying to your daddy, oh my gosh, how am I going to cope? How are we going to cope? How are we going to cope? And I'd
Yeah.
never even held a baby, so I had no idea how to deal with 1, let alone 2.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge transformation to go through from being with no babies to being with 2 babies, and also being so far away from your family because the rest of them were living in England at the time.
Mm.
And did you have any support during your pregnancy other than dad?
Yes, I had Isti, who's one of our closer, like a surrogate granny, who I was close with, and she's a twin. I
Is
also
she?
had,
I didn't
yes,
know
she's a
that.
twin. Isti's a twin.
Wow.
I also had various other friends. I had quite a strong female network, and I was, of course, very close with your dad. He was a great support to me. I researched the best and most experienced twin home birth midwife in
Mhm.
Australia, Maggie Lackey Thompson. And so she and her premium assistant became my 2 midwives, and I saw them regularly throughout my pregnancy. And at the same time, I also engaged the best private obstetrician locally in Wollongong because I didn't know
Mhm.
how my pregnancy would go, and I didn't know whether I would go into hospital or not. I didn't know anything about the hospital, I didn't know anything about birth, and I had a lot to learn. So I just covered all my bases and made sure that everybody was as safe and secure as possible in the process.
Did you get any advice?
No one
from
really gave
anyone?
me advice because I sought my advice through my midwives and
Yeah.
also from my obstetrician. But what I did find was, like, the hospital was only a 10 to 15-minute drive from where we lived. It wasn't far, but
Okay.
it was quite a small department. And, you know, I only had one or two specialists to choose from. And to be quite honest, they had one birthing model. And that was that I would be strapped to the bed with two monitor belts for the duration of the labour.
Yeah.
And as I found out and researched more and more about labour and, you know, the actual physiology of it and how the pelvis opens and all these things, I just started to think, well, there's no way in the world I'm going to be able to birth being strapped to
Yeah.
a bed. You know, my tailbone will be jammed up against everything.
Yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to birth lying down like that? It'll probably lead to interventions. And then I sort of thought, well, it's pretty clear that if I go the hospital route, I thought there'd be a high chance of interventions and
Mm.
cesarean at the end of the day. And the home midwives had delivered so many babies healthily at home that I thought that would be the best option if it felt like it was the right thing. I wished that the hospital would be able to offer me other solutions because there are plenty of solutions that can be offered in a hospital. And I
Mm.
think that I was a little bit caught between systems. It was a very extreme one way home birth, and the other way being strapped with two monitor belts to the bed, despite the fact I was
Yeah.
27, healthy, and could quite easily have laboured normally, being able to move around and then be monitored periodically. So they weren't open to that in the hospital, I was told. So really, it became quite a difficult choice for me.
Mm. Well, I mean, even today, it still baffles me that people are still being told to lay on their back and labor because there's so many studies out there that say that movement really helps you move the baby down and get it into the optimal position and all that stuff, and actually makes your labor much easier than just lying on your back like they do in the movies. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like so many women go into labor and they think, that's how I'm going to labor because that's how it's done, right? And they're still using that today. But it's also the fact that you had twins, and everyone who has twins, even today, is automatically classified as a high-risk pregnancy. Even if it's a normal pregnancy with no complications, you're young, you're healthy, they automatically classify you as a high-risk pregnancy, and you're pretty much booked in for your induction the second that you find out that you have twins, because they don't want you to go over term. But anyway, I have some more questions about your actual pregnancy, and then we'll get into your birth in a minute. So as your pregnancy went on, how did you find being pregnant with twins? Did your morning sickness continue the whole time, or did it
For quite a
subside and
long
then you?
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was from memory, it was a good 5 months or so that was really quite nauseous and very easily triggered. I remember going into a waiting room, like at an airport or a large building, and somebody had eaten garlic, and I could smell. You know, you become so sensitive. If anybody's eaten garlic in 100 people, you're in the same, you know, terminal building or something with, you will smell it. And so there were some things I couldn't bear. I found it very difficult to speak to people because I was very sensitive to their energy.
Yeah.
Um, and crossing a road was extremely confusing. It was as though one twin would say, "Okay, it's safe to go now," and the other one would say, "No, it's not." I literally gave up crossing roads. I used to say to your daddy, "Please just hold my hand and cross me over the road because I can't for the life of me work out when to cross. There are too many people trying to make the decision."
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're still like that now. So
Yeah. So I think it was a fascinating process. When I was nearly full term, it was very painful on the skin on my tummy and like the layers of my tummy. It felt as though I had my tummy on a hot plate. It was very, very painful. But otherwise, I did my full yoga practice till they were born, everything, all a full practice. So I remember doing like tree pose and everything, even at 9 months pregnant. And I walked a lot. I was fit, healthy, in very good shape. And when we scanned the babies, one was slightly smaller than the other, but it wasn't seen as any kind of problem. And I actually carried them over full term.
That's great to hear. I mean, a lot of women don't carry to full term. It's very common to have your twins before 40 weeks. Sometimes they even come at 37 or 36 weeks. So you did yoga. Did you do anything else like birthing classes that you took dad to when you did together? Or did you see an acupuncturist or anything like that?
We just went to see the midwives together. So the midwives talked to us about things. It was a natural process and we weren't too worried about it. We were very peaceful. Having said that, towards the end of the pregnancy, I remember I used to wake up in the night at 2 or 3 in the morning and I'd have to just lie in the bath and cry my eyes out for an hour. It was like an uncontrollable thing. I think I was so awash with hormones that there was sometimes I just needed to have a good cry. So I'd go and lie in the bath on my own in the night and just have a good cry sometimes. And then after an hour or so, your dad would come in and say, "Come on," we'd go back to bed and go to sleep. So there were, you know, it was a journey, and we were really looking forward to the birth of the twins, and the specialist I saw at the hospital, and the specialist midwives kept checking on me. I had all the scans and everything, and I think because I was so young, it was much easier. I think for women doing twins later in life, it would be a very different story. But yes, I was quite comfortable except for my skin, and I was huge. I mean, the twins were big. I was very big.
Tell me how long you carried them for. What week were you gestation
I
when
can't totally
labor started?
remember, but I think it was well over 40 weeks. I think it was 43 and a half weeks or something from memory.
I remember seeing a photo actually, and your belly was very, very big. And you're not a big person. You're a very little person, and having that big belly just looked uncomfortable. So you are a power woman.
Yeah,
Doing
I'm a
that.
power woman, full machine.
You said to me earlier you didn't really have a birth plan. You just kind of were going with the flow and seeing what happened. Did your healthcare providers say anything to you about, oh, you're getting to 40 weeks, we want to induce you, or anything like that?
No, and I mean, everyone was aware of the dates. Nobody was concerned. You know, I had the traditional health practitioner in the hospital, the obstetrician, and the midwives. Everybody was happy. Obviously, I stayed in touch with everyone. I had all my checkups and scans and everything. And there was no date set for induction or anything. And I naturally went into labour. I remember saying to Henry, "When is it going to happen?" And he looked at the calendar that was hanging on the wall, and there was a picture of 2 little girls holding hands, which was the beginning of Gemini. And
Oh,
he said that day, and that's when it started.
that's sweet. I love that.
I just didn't make the decision as to what I was going to do until I went into labour. And I just felt that when it happened, I'd know exactly what to do. From where I went into labour, things were fine for 12 hours, but then things started to get a little difficult. And there was a very difficult situation which arose because once I did go into the hospital, I was told everything was fine and the baby was fine. And it was after that when I put myself in the hospital's hands, that there were a lot of problems.
I want to hear from the beginning, step by step, what you remember with your labor. Like, what time was it? Did you wake up in the middle of the night and your water had broken? Or
Yeah, my contractions started very gently from memory. It must have been in the morning. And then we called the midwife, and the junior midwife came. And I remember going for a nice little walk with her out of the house. We lived on a reserve, so I remember walking through the reserve with her, and that was really the beginning of my labouring time. Granny arrived from Indonesia partway through that, and it was so good to see her. And I remember her sitting on the sofa with her hand on my tummy and going through contractions with me and things. And then some hours later, the more experienced midwife arrived, and we just followed the progression of the labour because obviously the contractions might have just stopped. I mean, we didn't really know what we were doing at that point. And I just put myself into the hands of the midwife to guide the process, and I laboured. And they knew I had the obstetrician there. If at any point they felt that was what was needed, they would have put me in the car and taken me to hospital. and they knew very much that that was the way everything was set up. So the labour began, and it just went on and on for probably about 10 or 11 hours. And then at about 12 and a half hours, Natia was born. And she was little. She was 5 pounds, and she was healthy, and she was perfect. And she was put in my arms, and she squawked. And it was the first little squawk I'd ever heard from one of my babies. And I breastfed her, and my labour didn't continue at this point. And after a few hours, my contractions still hadn't returned, and the other baby's amniotic sac was still intact, and there was no sign of distress. And so after a little while, I said I wanted to go to the hospital, and so they called an ambulance. The firstborn baby was with the granny at home, and she was waddled and happy and peaceful, and I still had another baby to birth.
Yeah.
And it was the next day, and I'd lost a bit of blood. I was tired, and I was clear that I couldn't do it all again, and that I was ready to have a cesarean for the second baby.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go through another labour. So when I got to the hospital with my midwife and met the doctor, he was really angry that I had allowed myself to go into labour at home. They did a reading of the baby that was still in my tummy.
Yeah.
Her heartbeat was normal. There was no sign of distress, they told me. Then they broke the waters. There was no sign of meconium. Oh, maybe they didn't. I think they just decided I was going to have a cesarean, and that was
Okay.
it. It was in the night, so it was about 2 a.m. They kept me waiting 3.5 hours from memory.
Did the midwife stay with you when you went
Yes,
to
the
the
midwife
hospital?
stayed with me, and they stayed with me until I went for the cesarean. But there was no rush. There was no alert. They told me the baby was stable. I was stable. And there was no hurry to get me into surgery or anything. So about 3.5 hours later, they took me in for cesarean. They didn't give me a choice of epidural. They told me that I was having general anaesthetic, and that was that. And then I have a vague memory of being shown Rosie, of breastfeeding Rosie in the nursery, and then of being wheeled up to the ward where I spent the next several days. I actually couldn't open my eyes except very blearily for
Yeah.
a split second here and a split second there for about 3 days after that cesarean. And I just remember doctors coming and questioning me. What had the midwives given me? What did I take? What had I done? They said that my blood makeup was the same, and Rosie's, were the same as someone who'd been in a life-threatening accident.
Your consciousness or?
Our blood makeup, that we had the
Oh,
bloods.
okay.
Rosie and I both had the bloods of someone who nearly died in a car crash or something.
So you obviously had some of your chemicals that had been released that would have been the same as someone who had been in a big accident. That's
It
what you're
wasn't,
saying, like the
yeah,
trauma chemicals
we had
in
all the
your
trauma
blood.
chemicals, but also from memory, it was magnesium levels and things were all out of whack.
Yeah.
So we both were like people who'd been on the brink of death. So Rosie couldn't open her eyes and I couldn't open my eyes. And we were absolutely fine and conscious and in perfect health when we went in for the surgery, and when we came out, we couldn't open our eyes. So between being put under, operated on, and brought back around, things happened that I've never delved into. I've never asked for all the records. But quite
Yeah.
frankly, I think I was enormous with lots of water, probably at that point in my pregnancy. I was probably looked a lot bigger than I was. Maybe there was too
Maybe
much
they.
anesthetic or something. Maybe they misjudged
Yeah.
my body weight, my actual
Yeah.
body weight. But thankfully, Rosie was a big baby. She was 8 pounds,
Yeah.
7, 12. Thankfully, because if she'd been smaller, maybe she wouldn't have survived whatever happened. But she was strong and she fought hard. It took her 10 days to be released from the humidity crib.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very traumatic time. And it took me a long time thinking through it to see if I'd done the right thing or the wrong thing. You know, if the hospital had said, look, you can come in and we'll just give you a cesarean with an epidural, and that's the safest way for you to have your children, I may have chosen that over trying to have a home birth. When I researched all the interventions and I saw the complication rates, that's not something you take lightly either. So, I looked at all the statistics for home birth for twins. I looked at all the statistics for each intervention, each possible course the birth might take. My decision was that it wasn't any safer to go into that situation in the hospital than to have the best midwives at home and see if the babies could be born naturally at home. So I made my choices, the midwives made theirs, the doctors made theirs, the anaesthetist made theirs. And at the end of the day, I'm very grateful that I wasn't killed in the surgery, that I made it through. And I'm very grateful that Rosie also made it through. And I'm very grateful that Martia had the home birth that she had, because I think that was also important for her. I don't think she would have survived what Rosie and I went through, because she was so tiny.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts. Hopefully I'm still allowed to have my free thinking. I'm not trying to influence anybody in any way.
No, obviously. I think it's so, there's so many birth stories out there. And I mean, every birth is different, but they generally go along the same kind of path and the same kind of events. And your story with the twins has always, whenever I tell people, oh, my sisters, they're born 8 hours apart, they're born on different days and they're twins and all that stuff. And they go, wow, oh my gosh, your mom must have been through a lot. And they just look at me like, that's amazing. And also crazy, like what a journey that would have been. And I think it's so important to listen to these birth stories and to listen to people's experiences, to take what you want from the story and leave what you don't want. It's just experiences, it's not factual information. And it's very sad for me to read that 2 out of 3 women come out of their birth with trauma, and then they have to work through that trauma.
I'm very grateful that both girls survived and I survived. I think if I tried to birth them, if I was a woman living in a village somewhere, in a remote community, in another culture, I may have died in childbirth and Rosie may have died in that birth. She had the cord wrapped around her neck, as it turned out. She was not traumatized at all at the point where her birth began. But something in the actual delivery created a bleed on her brain, made her hypothalamus gland malfunction, which meant that her whole endocrine system wasn't functioning. So, I think one has to go into it knowing it's all worth it, because at the end of the day, you bring a human being into the world that you will love more than anything you can ever imagine. After having the twins, and then, am I allowed to say you about your birth? I had one baby at home. I had one baby by cesarean in the hospital, and then Berenice was born in 33 minutes in the middle of the night at home, and I had no choice. I would never have made it anywhere anyway. She was born at home. And, to have a baby in 33 minutes in the middle of the night at home is a very healing experience. So I'm very grateful for that as a sort of birthing sandwich, the last layer of my birthing sandwich. So I feel complete as a woman because I've had that experience. But as you know, I've said to all my daughters, you don't have to go through all that trauma of a natural birth. If you want to have a cesarean, there's no shame in it. And if I had my time again, I definitely would have had the twins by planned cesarean. I wouldn't have put myself or them through what happened, but I would have really made sure my anaesthetist knew my body weight all the way through my pregnancy, and I would have been very careful with my obstetrician at the hospital to make sure we planned the anaesthetic very carefully, and not just be thrown into a general anaesthetic in the middle of the night situation. So I think that's an important point, and we don't all end up in good order after natural childbirth either. So there are a lot of topics here, and trauma is a decision. I think we need to be able and committed to move through. we don't just birth the baby, we birth ourselves, and we go through a rite of passage. And we need to be proud of all aspects of it and of being able to do it. And we need to be willing to move through all the layers of emotionality that come on the other side of it that we have to heal. That's a part of birthing. We just need to own it and support each other to go through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big transformation, and that's where doulas have started coming in the recent years. They're not a old concept. They've been around for many, many years. It's just now people taking back their right to choose the type of birth that they want to have and knowing their options. And I've heard that it's a birth rebellion. Like, there's a fantastic podcast about it all, but I'm addressing it from a different perspective, just providing education. And as I said before, taking what you want and leaving what you don't want. And as you said, there's no shame in having a cesarean if that's what you feel you want to do with your body. It's completely fine, and doulas do support you through that as well. I think there's a misconception that doulas only do home birth and they're very hippy dippy. And there are doulas for every path of life, every transition of life, and every type of birth. They're there to support you in your decisions of how you want to birth your baby, and they're there until the end. Some help you with breastfeeding, some help you into the postpartum period, and if you do happen to have postpartum, can also help you with that. But tell me quickly before we finish up, what support did you have after the birth?
So Henry's oldest sister came from New Zealand, which was wonderful. So I basically didn't really have to worry about anything. I didn't have to worry about the twins. I'd lost a lot of blood and I was pretty beaten up. The first day I was conscious and able to get up and walk, I was walking down to the floor below to the nursery where Rosie was to go and feed and hold her, and I'd spend as much time as I could holding her. I think I had a very good support network. I had the cranial osteopath come to the hospital and treat us all, which was amazing, and we really, really needed it. I had all my network of girlfriends who I'd been through the pregnancy with bringing me boxes with homemade food and little, little packets of almonds and green juices and bottles of Floridix, and I mean, they were just phenomenal.
Yeah.
They would bring lots of supplies. As soon as I was breastfeeding twins, I didn't eat out of normal bowls and off normal plates anymore. I was eating out of serving bowls because I would eat a whole 500-gram packet of pasta, and then I would eat 12 Weetabix or a whole saucepan of soup. Or I literally was eating like a football team, and the twins were very well fed. The midwives all said I had amazing breast milk. It was kind of orange colour for days. So they had a really good beginning. They really stimulated my body to give them what they needed. So I was very well supported by family, by friends. I'm probably not allowed to really recommend you have an excellent cranial osteopath, but certainly after my cesarean, it was very, very helpful to us to have support from cranial osteopath, helping us heal. And I think that what you said previously about having a doula is very interesting. Because I had one baby naturally at home in a home birth, so she came through the birth canal and we had our bonding moment. I was fully conscious, she was fully conscious. And then my experience with Rosabelle, where we both nearly died, bonding with Rosie was a different process.
Yeah.
And I remember it was quite traumatic to have that comparison and to have to work through the feeling that I wasn't as bonded with Rosabelle in the beginning because I'd had a general anaesthetic and it was about 3 days before we could consciously start to connect. My midwives were a great help to me at that time. I think that a doula is probably even more important with a caesarean birth than with a home birth, but not in the same way. In terms of being able to help the mother to know ways of really bonding with the baby and to give the baby all the same benefits where possible that a naturally born baby has had. Because obviously when a baby doesn't come through the birth canal, it doesn't get exposed to the same bacteria, You have a different bonding processes. It doesn't
Yeah.
lose the neonatal instincts or the in what do you call it, in utero instincts for the way it moves around the womb, like the reflexes that help it to move around in the womb don't get moved out of the brain in the same way as when it's had the big squeeze coming through the birth canal. So the cranial osteopaths, for example, can help to put that straight in the nervous system. There are lots of things you can do to help a mother bond with a baby when she's had a cesarean. I think a doula can play a very great role in that, and that would be very important in helping to allay postpartum depression.
Yeah. Yes,
Thankfully,
definitely.
I didn't have a problem with that, and I was mega busy because I had 2 babies to care for.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm glad that your third birth, or no, it was technically a third birth. You gave birth to 2 babies and then you had me. I'm
Yeah.
glad that mine was healing for you, and I think it's so important to have that healing experience. However you choose to have that healing experience, it might not actually be through having another baby, it might be through something else. But thank you for sharing your experience and all your little tips and tricks, and I can't wait to experience it when I have mine. Hopefully it
And
won't be too long before we
uh,
have our babies, but yes, I'm looking forward to it,
but it's
but
all
not
worth
too
it, you
far
know.
away.
The joy of having children is so much greater than any of the difficulty of giving birth to them. Before you have a baby, you're a maiden, and when you've had a baby, you're a mother, and it really is a rite of passage for a woman. And the fact that it's a bit traumatic emotionally and it's painful is just a part of the enormity of the transformation, as you said before. And I think, in a way, women need to embrace the trauma and give it allowance and feel proud that they've been through that experience, and not try and shy away from it with fear. It's huge. It's wonderful. It makes you this amazing mother, because you go through so much to bring these people into the world, and then they sure as hell put you through once they're here. You know, it prepares you. It prepares you for the journey of being a parent. That is huge.
Well, some traumas are worse than others, and everybody has their different processes. So it's good to hear your process. But thank you, and hopefully we'll hear from you again soon.
Thank you. My
Thank
pleasure.
you. For more information on pregnancy, birth, and parenthood, head over to my website or Instagram at blissfulbirth.co. And just a little reminder, the information contained in this podcast is here to educate and empower, and does not replace the advice of your own healthcare provider.